Nancy, you've been involved with a long-term study of twins separated at birth and reared apart. Tell us what you found out about personality and twins.
Well, the extraordinary thing that we found with personality is that twins raised apart are just as similar as twins raised together. And this is a counterintuitive finding because you'd think that people raised together should be more alike. But what this tells us is that it's not the similar environments that are making twins alike, it's rather their common genes. And I should point out that twins are not exactly the same in personality. We estimate that about 50% of the differences among people are tied to their genetic differences. But nevertheless, the fact that identical twins raised apart are as similar as twins raised together was a very big finding and really made us rethink the way the environment works.
So how much of our personalities would you say is genetic, based on the research you've done?
We estimate that about 50% of the differences among people are tied to their genetic differences. Now, that's not to say that we can take a single individual and organize their personality into a genetic component or an environmental one, but rather we use identical and fraternal twins to estimate how much of the variation in populations in personality can be tied to the genes. And, you know, twins reared apart have taught us so many other things, too. We see genetic influences on intelligence, on occupational interests, on religiosity. We mentioned that earlier. But I also want to point out that it's not perfect similarity. There is environmental influence in all of these traits.
You talked about intelligence, and I know that that's a fairly controversial area, but what are you finding out about intelligence? Is that something we're born with too?
Well, we're born with predispositions for special talents, special abilities, and general intelligence. And we find from studies of twins raised together, twins raised apart, and adopted individuals that the amount of genetic influence is somewhere between 50 and 70%.
Nick, what does this tell us about that whole old nature versus nurture argument? Because that really is what it gets down to, doesn't it?
Well, as I said before, I think that the tide has changed, and I don't think it's going to swing back out again on that. That the evidence is now overwhelming for the importance of genetic factors, but also for the subtlety of it, as both Tim and Nancy have highlighted, that in many ways the genes are acting by actually steering people towards particular environmental choices. So you're actually steering people towards choosing this school or this neighbourhood or you know, this particular occupation, and the genes have their influence in that way. So.
I'm just interested in getting a bit of a sounding from the twins here on some of this stuff, because we've talked about intelligence, we've talked about health, we've talked about personality. I mean, how many of you feel those things are similar between you? Yes.
Certainly I think Ingrid and I are very different in our personalities. In fact, being psychologists, we go home and do psych tests on each other, ourselves sometimes, and we come out very, very differently on psychology tests of personality. In fact, in the Myers-Briggs, I think we've only got one thing that's similar out of 4 categories, and we definitely find that's the case. We've got very similar values and beliefs, but very different personalities.
Ali and Zoe?
Well, we tend to like the same things. Like we tend to like drawing, both of us tend to like the same sort of music and that sort of thing. And we have very similar marks, and so a lot of the time, like with that whole cheating thing, people say that we cheated, and once, like when we had the exact same mark on a maths test, it was, everybody said we cheated, and it was like the one lesson we weren't sitting next to each other.
Yeah, plus like we have better marks since we've been in the same class.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Paula and Bridget, what about, what would we expect from you?
When I had to go to have an echo test on my heart, Paula went first, and then Bridget had to go and have her echo test, and the doctor goes, I hope you're not the same twin because your heartbeat is beating exactly the same time. He was so spooked.
Whoa, okay. Well, Tim Spector, I just want to ask you one quick question. What sort of things are you finding out aren't to do with genes? You said that things like beliefs and belief in God is to do with genes. What sort of things are you finding aren't?